Janitor father rejected on a blind date, but when a billionaire doctor sees him, she blows him a kiss. The fluorescent lights of the Hotel Melbrock's East Corridor hummed their monotonous symphony as Ryan Walker pushed his cleaning cart past the marble columns that had witnessed 1,000 stories. At 28, he'd learned that dignity wasn't about what you wore but how you wore it. Tonight, though, that philosophy was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. His blue uniform, crisp despite the day's work, bore the hotel's golden emblem on the chest pocket. The yellow gloves tucked into his belt were a badge he'd once been ashamed of, but now carried with quiet pride. Being a janitor wasn't his dream, but it was honest work that allowed him to spend his evenings doing what he truly loved, restoring his 1974 Harley-Davidson, a magnificent machine in deep ocean blue that represented freedom in its purest form. Ryan had promised himself he'd give dating one more try. After 3 years of raising his priorities alone, focusing on work and his mechanical passion, his friend Marcus had convinced him that loneliness wasn't a virtue. "Man, you're 28, not 88, Marcus had said over beers last Friday. "Let me set you up with my cousin's friend. She's nice, works in marketing, likes motorcycles." That last detail had sealed it. Ryan had agreed to meet Jennifer at the hotel's cafe at 8 o'clock. He'd even swapped shifts with Miguel to ensure he'd have time to shower and change after work. Except everything had gone wrong from the moment the delivery truck had crashed into the loading dock, spilling industrial cleaning supplies across the back lot. Ryan had spent 2 extra hours managing the mess, coordinating with suppliers, and ensuring none of the hazardous chemicals contaminated the hotel's systems. By 7:45, he'd accepted defeat. There was no time to go home, shower, and return. He'd texted Jennifer explaining the situation, asking if they could reschedule. Her response had been surprisingly understanding. "No worries, I'm actually already at the hotel cafe. Why don't you just meet me as you are? I don't mind." Ryan had hesitated. Meeting someone for the first time while wearing a janitor's uniform felt like setting himself up for judgment, but her message seemed genuine, and he was tired of letting fear dictate his choices. He'd washed his face and hands thoroughly, combed his dark hair, and made his way to the cafe with cautious optimism. Jennifer had been easy to spot. Auburn hair, green dress, scrolling through her phone at a corner table. She'd looked up as he approached, and Ryan had watched her smile freeze, then crack, then shatter into something between disappointment and disdain. "Jennifer, I'm Ryan. I'm so sorry about my appearance. The situation I mentioned." "Oh." The single syllable carried volumes. Her eyes had traveled from his face to his uniform to the name tag pinned above his heart. "You're the janitor." "I'm a maintenance supervisor, actually. But yes, I work in facilities management here." Jennifer had stood abruptly, gathering her purse. "I'm sorry, but Marcus told me you worked at the hotel. I assumed you meant in management or something. I don't think this is going to work out." The words had landed like physical blows. Ryan had felt his face heat, anger, and humiliation warring in his chest. "I see. Well, thank you for your honesty." "It's nothing personal," Jennifer had added, which somehow made it worse. "I just have certain expectations for my life, you know? I'm sure you understand." She'd left before Ryan could formulate a response. He'd stood there for a long moment, watching her retreat through the lobby, past the fountain with its ridiculous cherub statues, past the tourists checking in with their designer luggage, past the life he apparently wasn't worthy of accessing. Now, 40 minutes later, Ryan pushed his cart with perhaps more force than necessary, his jaw tight as he moved through his closing routine. The East Corridor needed attention. Someone had spilled coffee near the elevator bank, and the windows overlooking the street bore fingerprints from the afternoon rush of guests. He worked mechanically, letting the familiar motion soothe his bruised ego. Spray, wipe, move forward. Spray, wipe, move forward. The rhythm was meditative, a form of active meditation that had gotten him through harder times than a failed date. The Hotel Melbrock was a strange beast, equal parts old-world elegance and modern efficiency. The lobby featured Art Deco flourishes from its 1920s origins, but the upper floors had been renovated with sleek, contemporary design. Ryan had been working here for 4 years, ever since he'd moved back to the city after his life had fallen apart in ways he preferred not to dwell on. The hotel had become his anchor, a place where he understood the rules and could lose himself in the tangible satisfaction of making things clean, functional, beautiful. What Jennifer didn't know, what most people didn't know, was that Ryan had chosen this path. He'd walked away from a promising career in engineering consulting when the corporate world had revealed itself to be spiritually bankrupt. The 80-hour weeks, the political maneuvering, The slow realization that he was building someone else's dream while his own withered. It had all become too much. The final straw had been missing his father's last coherent conversation before Alzheimer's claimed him completely, all because of a client dinner that couldn't be rescheduled. He'd quit the next day, sold his condo, bought the Harley from an estate sale, and started over. The janitor position had been temporary, just until he figured out his next move. 4 years later, he was still here, but he'd stopped seeing it as temporary. There was dignity in maintaining spaces where people created memories. There was honor in work that left visible results. And there was freedom in a job that ended when his shift did, leaving his evenings free for the mechanical meditation of rebuilding his motorcycle piece by piece. Ryan rounded the corner toward the lobby, his cartwheels squeaking slightly. He made a mental note to oil them tomorrow. The lobby was quieter now, post-dinner lull before the late-night bar crowd arrived. The concierge, Thomas, gave him a sympathetic nod. Word traveled fast among the hotel staff, and Ryan suspected everyone knew about his disastrous date by now. That's when he saw her. Celeste Davenport stood behind the reception desk of the hotel's medical concierge service, a luxury feature the Mel Brock offered to guests willing to pay premium rates for on-site health care. She was reviewing something on a tablet, her blonde hair catching the light from the crystal chandelier above. Ryan had seen her before, of course. Everyone who worked at the Hotel Mel Brock knew who she was. At 24, she'd inherited the entire chain from her father, Richard Davenport, when he'd passed away 2 years ago. The business magazines had called her the billion-dollar heiress, speculating endlessly about whether she could fill her father's considerable shoes. Ryan had formed his own opinion through observation. Unlike her father, who'd visited the property monthly with an entourage of assistants, Celeste came alone, often staying in the owner's suite for weeks at a time. She worked late, ate in the hotel restaurant alone, and treated the staff with a courtesy that seemed genuine rather than performative. He'd once held an elevator for her when she was struggling with an armload of files. She'd thanked him by name. He'd been surprised she knew it and asked how his evening was going. Tonight she wore a royal blue blazer over what looked like denim shorts, an unusual combination that somehow worked on her. Her skin had the golden tone of someone who spent time outdoors, and her blue eyes were striking even from a distance. She was, objectively, beautiful. She was also so far out of his orbit that he'd never even considered her as anything but the owner of the establishment that employed him. Ryan had no intention of approaching the medical desk. He was simply moving through the lobby toward the service elevator when Celeste looked up from her tablet. Their eyes met across 30 feet of polished marble floor. He expected her gaze to slide past him, the way most people's did when they saw the uniform. Instead, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or curiosity. And then, inexplicably, impossibly, she smiled. Not a polite smile, but something warmer, more personal. And then she did something that stopped Ryan in his tracks. Celeste Davenport, billionaire CEO, heiress to a hotel empire, raised her hand to her lips and blew him a kiss. Ryan froze. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. Around him, the lobby continued its evening rhythm. Guests chatting, luggage carts rolling, the fountain babbling. But he felt suspended in a moment that made no sense. Had she meant it for him? Maybe she'd been looking past him at someone else. Ryan glanced behind him, but there was only the wall with its expensive art. When he looked back, Celeste was still watching him, her smile now touched with something that might have been amusement at his confusion. She gave a small wave, then returned her attention to her tablet, as if sending kisses to the janitorial staff was a perfectly normal part of her evening routine. Ryan stood there for another few seconds, completely thrown off balance. His face felt hot, his pulse had kicked up, and beneath the confusion and surprise, something else stirred, a tiny spark of possibility that he immediately tried to extinguish. This was absurd. She was probably just being kind, having witnessed his humiliation with Jennifer. Rich people did strange things sometimes, performed random acts of charity that made them feel good about themselves. Except the look in her eyes hadn't seemed charitable. It had seemed interested. Ryan forced himself to continue toward the service elevator, but his hands were unsteady as he pushed his cart. Behind him, he felt rather than saw Celeste's gaze following his retreat. The sensation was disconcerting and thrilling in equal measure. The service elevator arrived with a soft chime. Ryan pushed his cart inside, then turned back toward the lobby. Celeste was still there, but now she was speaking with a guest, her professional mask back in place. She looked every inch the confident executive, someone who had been born into privilege and wore it as naturally as breathing. The elevator doors closed, and Ryan released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. What the hell had just happened? His phone buzzed as the elevator descended. A text from Marcus. "Dude, Jennifer just called me. Said you were a janitor? Why didn't you tell her what you used to do?" Ryan typed back with more force than necessary. "Because what I used to do doesn't matter. This is what I do now." Marcus. "Man, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You could get a real job again if you wanted." Ryan. "This is a real job." He pocketed his phone without waiting for a response. Marcus meant well, but he'd never understood Ryan's choices. Few people did. The world divided professions into worthy and unworthy, into careers that deserved respect and labor that deserved invisibility. Ryan had made peace with being invisible. Tonight's encounter with Celeste had rattled that peace. The basement level smelled of industrial soap and old concrete. Ryan returned his cart to the supply room, checked off his completion log, and clocked out. His Harley waited in the employee parking area, a gleaming presence under the security lights. He'd spent the last 6 months rebuilding the engine, machining new parts when originals weren't available, learning the mechanical intimacy that came from understanding every bolt and gasket. The bike was more than transportation. It was proof that beautiful things could be resurrected with patience and skill. That value wasn't determined by price tags, but by the care invested in preservation and renewal. Ryan straddled the bike, feeling the familiar weight settle beneath him. The engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying rumble. He sat there for a moment, letting the vibration travel through his body, grounding himself in the physical world after the emotional turbulence of the evening. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he allowed himself one glance back at the hotel's illuminated facade. Somewhere up there, in an office or suite far above his pay grade, Celeste Davenport was probably already forgetting the spontaneous gesture she'd made to a janitor. It had meant nothing. It couldn't mean anything. But as Ryan merged into traffic, the memory of her smile lingered like a melody he couldn't quite shake. The next morning arrived too early. Ryan's alarm blared at 5:30, dragging him from dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him feeling restless. He lay in his small apartment's darkness, listening to the city wake up beyond his windows. His neighbors upstairs were arguing again, their voices a familiar morning soundtrack. The coffee maker in the next unit hissed and gurgled through the thin walls. This was his life, a studio apartment in a building that had seen better decades, furniture from thrift stores and Craigslist, a job that paid his bills but built no future. He'd made his choices and he didn't regret them, mostly. But there were mornings when the gap between who he'd been and who he'd become felt like a canyon he'd willingly jumped into, only to discover there was no rope to climb back up. Ryan rolled out of bed and went through his morning routine with military efficiency. Shower, shave, instant coffee, toast with peanut butter. The Harley parts spread across his tiny dining table. A carburetor he was rebuilding called to him. But there was no time this morning. He had the early shift, 6 to 2, which meant he'd have the afternoon free for mechanical therapy. The ride to work was cold, November wind cutting through his jacket. The city was beautiful at this hour, empty streets and long shadows, traffic lights cycling through their patterns for an audience of few. Ryan loved these solitary rides, the sense of being alone with his thoughts and the road. He arrived at the Hotel Melbrock 20 minutes before his shift, parked in his usual spot, and made his way to the service entrance. The morning crew was already gathering. Maria from housekeeping, Jose from maintenance, Susan from the front desk finishing her night shift. They exchanged greetings and complaints about the cold, the comfortable rhythm of people who'd worked together long enough to become something like family. Ryan's supervisor, Douglas, was a man in his 50s who'd spent 30 years in hotel management. He respected Ryan's work ethic even if he occasionally pushed him to pursue supervisor training. "You're wasted on the floor, Walker. You've got leadership potential. I'm happy where I am, Doug." "Nobody's happy as a janitor, kid. Don't bullshit me." But Ryan was happy, or at least content. The work was meditative. The results were immediate and visible. He wasn't climbing a corporate ladder that led nowhere he wanted to go. He'd learned the hard way that ambition could be a trap, a treadmill that made you run faster without ever reaching anywhere that mattered. His morning assignments included the executive floors, 12 through 15. These were the premium suites where the wealthiest guests stayed, the rooms with Italian marble bathrooms and panoramic city views. Ryan preferred working these floors. They were quieter, and the guests who could afford them tended to be either never there or extremely polite. He started on 12, methodically working his way through the corridor. The work was rhythmic. Restock the complimentary coffee stations, check the ice machines, spot clean any marks on the walls, ensure the carpets showed perfect vacuum lines. He took pride in the details, the small touches that most people never noticed, but that created an atmosphere of maintained excellence. Around 9, Ryan was refilling the towel cabinet on 14 when he heard voices approaching from the elevator bank. One voice he recognized immediately, Celeste Davenport. The other was male, older, with the authoritative tone of someone used to being obeyed. "Miss Davenport, I really must insist that we discuss the quarterly projections. The board is expecting a presentation and, Gerald, I've read the projections. They're fine, better than fine. We're up 8% from last year. Yes, but the expansion plans for the Singapore property require. I'll review them this afternoon. Right now, I'm conducting property inspections." They rounded the corner and Ryan found himself face to face with Celeste and a man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Ryan stepped back against the wall, making space for them to pass, a learned invisibility that came with the uniform, but Celeste stopped. "Good morning, Ryan." He blinked, surprised she remembered his name from one elevator encounter months ago. "Good morning, Ms. Davenport. How are the floors looking today? Any maintenance issues I should know about?" It was a professional question, but her eyes held that same warmth from last night, that flicker of something that felt personal. Gerald, the suit, looked impatient, clearly considering this conversation a waste of the CEO's valuable time. "Everything's in good order," Ryan said, "though the ice machine on 12 is making a grinding noise. I've put in a work order for the mechanical team to check it out." Celeste nodded. "Thank you for staying on top of that. I appreciate how you take initiative." She paused, and Ryan could have sworn he saw mischief flicker across her features. "That's a nice watch, by the way. Vintage?" Ryan glanced at his wrist. The watch was a 1970s Seiko his father had given him. Nothing fancy, but kept running through patient maintenance. "It was my father's. It suits you. Classic design, quality craftsmanship." She smiled, then turned to Gerald. "See? Attention to detail matters at every level. That's what makes a property excellent rather than adequate." Gerald made a non-committal noise, clearly wanting to move the conversation back to quarterly projections and expansion plans. Celeste gave Ryan a final nod before continuing down the corridor, her heels clicking against the carpet, Gerald trailing behind like a worried accountant. Ryan stood there, processing the interaction. She'd noticed his watch. She'd complimented it. She'd used him as an example to her executive team. And there'd been that moment, so brief he might have imagined it, where her smile had felt like a shared secret. He shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts taking root there. This was dangerous territory. Celeste Davenport was his employer's employer. She was wealthy beyond anything he could comprehend. She lived in a world of private jets and board meetings and social circles that required pedigrees and portfolios to enter. Whatever kindness she was showing him came from a place so far above his station that even thinking about it romantically was absurd. And yet, Ryan finished his morning rounds with the memory of her voice saying his name, the way she'd looked at him like he was a person rather than a function. It shouldn't matter. It couldn't matter. But it did. Lunch was a sandwich from the employee cafeteria, eaten alone at a corner table while scrolling through motorcycle forums on his phone. Ryan belonged to several online communities dedicated to vintage Harley restoration. These were his people, mechanics and enthusiasts who understood that working with your hands wasn't something to be ashamed of, but celebrated. They shared tips on sourcing parts, debated the merits of different oil weights, posted pictures of their projects with pride. His current rebuild, the '74 Harley, was generating interest. He'd been documenting the restoration process, and his last post showing the engine reassembly had gotten over 100 comments. Some guys from the forum were even talking about meeting up for a ride once spring came, doing a weekend trip through the mountains. It was a different kind of community than the corporate world he'd left behind. These relationships weren't transactional. Nobody cared what your job title was or how much you earned. The only currency that mattered was skill, patience, and the willingness to help others solve their mechanical mysteries. Ryan was reading a thread about carburetor tuning when someone sat down across from him. He looked up to find Maria, the head housekeeper, watching him with the expression she wore when she was about to meddle in his life. "So," Maria said, unwrapping her own lunch, "you had an interesting morning." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Did I? Word is the boss lady herself stopped to chat with you on 14, even complimented your watch." "It was a 30-second conversation, Maria," She was just being professional. Maria snorted. Professional, my ass. Celeste Davenport doesn't stop to chat with floor staff unless something's caught her attention. And rumor has it she blew you a kiss last night in the lobby. Ryan felt heat creep up his neck. Who told you that? Thomas the concierge told Susan, who told me. You know how this place is, no secrets. It wasn't. She was just being nice. I'd had a rough evening and I guess she noticed. Oh, she noticed all right. Maria leaned forward, her eyes serious despite the teasing edge to her voice. Listen, mijo. I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen the Davenports come and go. Richard, God rest his soul, was a good man but strictly business. Celeste, though, she's different. Lonely, I think. Rich as God but lonely. And I've seen how she looks around this place like she's searching for something real in all this expensive fakeness. What's your point, Maria? My point is, be careful. Not because I think she's playing games. I don't. But because you're a good man who's already been hurt enough, and the last thing you need is to get your heart tangled up with someone who lives in a completely different universe. Ryan appreciated Maria's protectiveness, but her words also irritated him. I'm 28, not 18. I'm not going to develop some inappropriate crush on the CEO because she was nice to me twice. Maria studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Okay, just promise me you'll be smart about this. About what? Nothing's happening, Maria. Nothing's going to happen. But even as he said it, Ryan knew he was lying to himself. Something was happening. Something that had started with a kiss blown across a marble lobby and continued with a conversation about a vintage watch. Something that had no logical future, but that already felt inevitable in ways he couldn't explain or control. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythm of work. Ryan handled a clogged drain in 317, restocked the laundry supply closets, and dealt with a minor crisis when a guest child had apparently tried to flush a toy car down the toilet. By the time 2 o'clock rolled around, he was ready to clock out and get home to his motorcycle parts. He was heading toward the time clock when Douglas intercepted him. Walker, got a special project for you if you're willing to stay an extra hour. Ryan suppressed a sigh. Douglas's special projects usually meant something unpleasant that nobody else wanted to handle. But the overtime would be helpful. The Harley rebuild was expensive, even sourcing used parts. What's the project? The owner's suite needs a deep clean. Ms. Davenport is staying there this week, and she specifically requested someone who pays attention to detail. I thought of you. Ryan's stomach did something complicated. She specifically requested me. She asked for our best maintenance person. That's you. Job pays double time since it's above your normal duties. Interested? Double time was hard to refuse, even if the situation made him nervous. Sure. When? Now if you can. She's out for meetings until 5, wants it done before she returns. 20 minutes later, Ryan stood outside the owner's suite on the hotel's top floor, his supply cart restocked with premium cleaning materials. He'd been in the suite once before, years ago, for an emergency repair. The space was less a hotel room and more a luxury apartment. 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, bathrooms that could have been featured in design magazines. He unlocked the door and stepped into a space that confirmed everything he knew about the gulf between his world and Celeste's. The furniture was modern but comfortable, expensive without being ostentatious. Abstract art hung on the walls, real art, not hotel prints. The kitchen counter held a French press and a bag of coffee beans from a roaster Ryan recognized as charging $20 a pound. But what caught his attention were the personal touches that revealed the woman who lived here temporarily. A laptop sat open on the dining table, surrounded by legal pads covered in handwritten notes. A pair of running shoes lay by the door, well worn. The coffee table held a stack of books, fiction mixed with business theory, a biography of Amelia Earhart, a collection of Mary Oliver poems. Ryan felt like an intruder, seeing these glimpses into Celeste's private life. He set to work methodically, starting with the kitchen, but his mind kept cataloging details. The refrigerator held mostly healthy food, but also a pint of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia. The bathroom counter had high-end skincare products, but also drugstore chapstick. The closet held designer clothes alongside comfortable jeans and faded t-shirts. He was vacuuming the living room when something caught his eye. A photograph in a simple frame on the side table. It showed a younger Celeste, maybe 15 or 16, standing next to an older man who could only be her father. But what stopped Ryan's breath was what Richard Davenport was sitting on. A blue Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The same model as Ryan's. The same year. the same deep ocean blue color. Ryan picked up the photo carefully, studying it. Richard Davenport looked happy in a way the business magazines had never captured, his arm around his daughter's shoulders, both of them grinning at whoever held the camera. And the Harley gleamed in the background, chrome perfect, paint flawless. It was his most prized possession. Ryan spun around, nearly dropping the frame. Celeste stood in the doorway, still wearing the royal blue blazer from earlier, but looking tired in a way that made her seem more human, less like the untouchable CEO. "I'm sorry," Ryan said quickly, setting the photo down. "I didn't hear you come in. I was just... Douglas said you wanted the suite cleaned and I..." "It's okay, Ryan." She moved into the room, setting her briefcase on the counter. "I came back early. Meetings were canceled." She glanced at the photograph. That bike was everything to him. He bought it the year I was born, worked on it every weekend, used to take me riding when I was little, scared my mother half to death. Ryan didn't know what to say. The revelation that Celeste's father had owned the same model Harley felt like one of those coincidences that was too significant to be random. "What happened to it?" he asked, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, that's too personal." But Celeste didn't seem offended. She moved closer to the photo, her expression distant. "He sold it when he got sick. Alzheimer's. He knew what was coming, wanted to get his affairs in order while he still could. Some guy answered the ad, paid cash, wrote it away. Dad made me promise not to track it down later. Said it needed to live with someone who'd love it the way he had, not sit in a garage as a museum piece. Alzheimer's, the same disease that had taken Ryan's father. The synchronicity felt almost painful. "I'm sorry," Ryan said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Celeste looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Recognition of shared loss, shared understanding of what it meant to watch someone you loved disappear piece by piece. "You understand?" she said. It wasn't a question. "My father had Alzheimer's too. He passed away 5 years ago." "Oh." Celeste's expression softened even further. "I'm so sorry, Ryan." They stood there in the expensive suite, a janitor and a billionaire, connected by parallel grief and blue motorcycles. The moment stretched, comfortable despite being charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. "I actually ride a Harley," Ryan heard himself say. "A 74, same model as your father's, same color. I've been restoring it for the past year." Celeste's eyes widened. "Really? That's quite a coincidence." "Yeah." Ryan felt suddenly self-conscious, aware that he was standing in her private space having a personal conversation that probably violated every professional boundary. "I should let you rest. I can finish this another time." "No, please finish. I don't mind." Celeste moved toward the kitchen. "Would you like some coffee?" "I was about to make some anyway." This was crossing lines, Ryan knew. He should decline politely, finish his work quickly, and leave. But something in Celeste's expression, a hopefulness maybe, or loneliness, made him nod. "Coffee would be great, actually. Thank you." As Celeste busied herself with the French press, Ryan returned to his work. But the dynamic had shifted. They were no longer employer and employee, but two people sharing space, sharing small talk, sharing something that felt dangerously close to connection. "So how did you end up working here?" Celeste asked, measuring coffee grounds. "I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I'm just curious. You seem like someone who's done other things." Ryan hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than evasion. "I used to be an engineering consultant, corporate world, good salary, career track, hated every minute of it. Quit 4 years ago, needed something simple while I figured out what actually mattered to me. And 4 years later, still figuring it out. But I've learned that simple doesn't mean meaningless. This job lets me be present in my life instead of always chasing some future that never arrives." Celeste poured hot water over the grounds, the rich smell of coffee filling the suite. "That's a very philosophical approach to janitorial work. Is that a criticism?" "No. It's an observation I respect." She pressed the plunger down slowly. "Most people chase more. More money, more status, more everything. You walked away from that. That takes courage. Or stupidity, depending on who you ask." Celeste smiled, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "My father used to say that wisdom and stupidity often looked identical until time revealed which was which." She handed him a mug. "Here's to not knowing the difference yet." They touched mugs gently, and Ryan felt the absurdity of the situation crash over him. He was drinking coffee with Celeste Davenport in her private suite, discussing philosophy and life choices, acting like this was normal when everything about it was extraordinary. "Can I ask you something?" Celeste said, settling onto the couch. Last night, when that woman walked out on you in the cafe, why did you just let her go? So she had witnessed the whole humiliating scene. Ryan felt his face heat but forced himself to meet her eyes. Because she was right to leave. Not right to be rude about it, but right to know what she wanted and what she didn't. I'm not ashamed of what I do, but I'm also not going to convince someone I'm worth knowing. Either people see value or they don't. And the kiss I sent you? What did you think that meant? The direct question caught Ryan off guard. He took a sip of coffee to buy time, trying to read her expression. Honestly, I thought you felt sorry for me. Rich people sometimes do kind things for those less fortunate. Makes them feel good about themselves. Celeste's laugh was sharp, more sad than amused. You think I feel good about myself? Don't you? You're successful, powerful, wealthy. I'm lonely, Ryan. The words came out flat, matter of fact. I inherited a billion-dollar company at 22 because my father died. I spend my days in meetings with men who resent my age and my gender, trying to prove I deserve what I didn't ask for. I go home to an empty penthouse and eat dinner alone. My friends from college stopped calling when they realized I couldn't be their ATM or their networking opportunity. She set her mug down, meeting his eyes directly. So, no, I don't feel sorry for you because you're a janitor. I felt a connection when I saw someone else who understood what it's like to be dismissed for what you are, rather than who you are. Hello, my friend. How was your day today? Is everything okay? The sudden shift to that warm, conversational question in English felt like a bridge being offered. Ryan found himself responding in kind. My day was unexpected, he said honestly. I came to work thinking I knew my place in the world. Now I'm not so sure. Good, Celeste said. Certainty is overrated. My father used to say that growth happens in the spaces where we don't quite fit yet. They talked for another hour. Ryan abandoned any pretense of cleaning, and Celeste seemed to forget she'd had a day of meetings. They discussed motorcycles and literature, the philosophy of work and the weight of expectations, the peculiar loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw you as a role rather than a person. Ryan learned that Celeste had wanted to be a doctor before her father's death, that she'd been 2 years into medical school when she'd had to drop out to run the company. She still kept medical textbooks in her suite, still sometimes thought about what might have been. Celeste learned that Ryan wrote poetry in a journal he kept hidden in his motorcycle's saddlebag, that he'd once believed ambition was virtue until it had cost him everything that actually mattered, that he dreamed sometimes of opening a motorcycle restoration shop but lacked the capital and the courage. When Ryan finally checked his watch, shocked to see it was past 6, Celeste walked him to the door. Thank you, she said quietly. Not for the cleaning, though I'm sure it's excellent, for the conversation. It's been a while since someone talked to me like a person rather than a checkbook or a board seat. Thank you for the coffee, and for seeing past the uniform. They stood in the doorway, neither quite willing to end the moment. Ryan knew he should leave, should maintain professional distance, should recognize that this afternoon was an anomaly that couldn't be repeated. But when Celeste spoke again, her voice held a question that changed everything. The Harley you're restoring, would you ever consider selling it? Ryan's instinct was to refuse immediately. The bike was his project, his meditation. But something in Celeste's expression stopped him. Why do you ask? Because I've spent 2 years trying not to think about my father's motorcycle, trying to honor his wish that I let it go. But seeing that photo tonight talking to you, I realize I want to see it again. Not to own it, just to see it, maybe ride it one more time, to remember what it felt like when everything was simpler and my father was just dad, not a legacy I'm trying to live up to. She paused, vulnerability clear in her features. Would that be possible? Could I see your bike sometime? Every rational part of Ryan's brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. Showing Celeste his bike meant seeing her again outside work. It meant crossing boundaries that existed for good reasons. It meant opening a door to something that had nowhere good to lead. Yes, he said, you can see it when. Celeste smiled, and the expression transformed her face from beautiful to luminous. Are you free this Saturday? I could come to you wherever you work on it. My apartment, I have a garage space in the building. Saturday works. They exchanged numbers, the transaction feeling more significant than it should. Ryan left the suite with his cart, his cleaning supplies forgotten in the living room, his mind spinning with the impossibility of what had just happened. As the elevator descended toward the basement level, carrying him back to his world, Ryan allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd been avoiding all evening. He was interested in Celeste Davenport, not because she was wealthy or powerful, but because she was intelligent and sad and searching for something real in a life that seemed to offer everything except authenticity. It was a terrible idea. It violated professional boundaries. It could end in nothing but pain for both of them. Their worlds were too different, the obstacles too numerous, the risks too great. But as Ryan clocked out and headed toward his Harley, he found himself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes the terrible ideas were the only ones worth pursuing. Sometimes the impossibility was the point. The November wind cut through his jacket as he rode home through city streets painted golden by streetlights. Above him, in a suite high above the city, Celeste Davenport stood at her window watching the traffic flow, wondering if she'd just made the best or worst decision of the past 2 years. Neither of them could have predicted where that decision would lead. Neither of them could have guessed how a blue motorcycle and shared grief would become the foundation of something neither expected, but both desperately needed. The story was just beginning, and for once Ryan allowed himself to believe that beginnings could be beautiful, even when their endings were uncertain. For once, he allowed himself to hope. Saturday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of November day where cold air sharpened every color and sound. Ryan had been awake since dawn, ostensibly working on the Harley's carburetor but mostly just moving tools around nervously. His garage space, a concrete box with flickering fluorescent lights and oil-stained floors, had never seemed more inadequate. What had he been thinking inviting a billionaire to this cramped, shabby space? At 10 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled into the building's lot. Ryan watched from the garage doorway as Celeste emerged, not in her usual business attire but in jeans, a cream sweater, and a leather jacket that looked simultaneously expensive and worn in. She carried 2 coffee cups and wore sunglasses that she pushed up into her hair as she approached. "Good morning," she said, handing him a cup. "I didn't know how you took it, so I got it black. There's cream and sugar in my car if you need." "Black's perfect, thank you." Ryan stepped aside, letting her enter the garage. "I apologize for the surroundings, it's not much." Celeste's attention had already locked onto the Harley. She moved toward it slowly, reverently, like approaching something sacred. The bike gleamed under the lights. Ryan had spent last night polishing every chrome surface, buffing the deep blue paint until it reflected like water. "Oh my God," she whispered, reaching out to touch the fuel tank. "It's identical, the same color, the same year, even the same aftermarket mirrors my father installed." Her hand trembled slightly against the metal. "It's like seeing a ghost." Ryan stood back, giving her space to process. He understood this moment wasn't about him or about romance or about anything except a daughter confronting a tangible piece of her lost father. "Would you like to sit on it?" he offered quietly. Celeste nodded, unable to speak. Ryan steadied the bike as she swung her leg over, settling into the seat with a familiarity that spoke of childhood memories. She gripped the handlebars, closed her eyes, and for a long moment, simply breathed. When she opened her eyes, they were wet. "He used to take me riding every Sunday morning. Mom hated it, thought it was dangerous, but Dad said some things were worth the risk. We'd ride out to this diner 40 miles away, eat pancakes, talk about everything and nothing. Those mornings were when he was most himself, not the businessman, just Dad." Ryan leaned against his workbench, watching her remember. "What did you talk about?" "Everything. He'd ask me about school, about boys, about what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told him I wanted to be a doctor, help people. He said that was good, that making money was easy but making a difference was hard." She laughed softly, sadly. "Then he died and left me his empire, and I never got to make that difference." "You still could," Ryan said. "It's not too late. I'm 24 and running a billion-dollar company. When would I find time for medical school? The question isn't when. It's whether you're living the life you want or the life you inherited." Celeste looked at him sharply, then smiled. "You have a dangerous habit of asking hard questions, Ryan Walker. Occupational hazard of having too much time to think while mopping floors." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and dismounted the bike carefully. "Would you take me for a ride? I know that sounds crazy and you barely know me, but I'd love to." Ryan grabbed his helmet and his father's old one he kept for the rare passenger. "Have you ridden since he passed?" "Not once. I couldn't bear it." He helped her secure the helmet, his hands gentle, aware of how significant this moment was. Then he straddled the bike, feeling it settle beneath his weight, and waited for her to climb on behind him. When her arms wrapped around his waist, tentative at first, then tighter, Ryan felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he'd kept locked for years. The engine roared to life and they pulled out into morning traffic. Ryan took them through the city first, letting Celeste acclimate to the rhythm, then headed for the coastal highway where the road opened up and the ocean spread blue and endless beside them. He felt her relax against his back, felt her grief transform into something lighter. Not joy exactly, but release. They rode for an hour, stopping at a cliff overlook where other motorcycles were parked, riders in leather and denim nodding to them in the universal acknowledgement of the brotherhood of the road. They stood at the railing, watching waves crash against rocks far below. The wind whipped Celeste's hair, pink coloring her cheeks, her eyes bright with something Ryan recognized as freedom. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for understanding what I needed even when I didn't know how to ask for it. Your father was right. Some things are worth the risk." Celeste turned to him, and the look in her eyes made Ryan's breath catch. "I'm taking a risk right now, maybe a stupid one, but I need to know, is this just kindness? Or do you feel it too?" Ryan knew what she was asking. He knew all the reasons he should lie, should protect them both from the impossibility of what was forming between them. But standing there with the wind and the ocean and this woman who saw him as he truly was, he couldn't bring himself to deny the truth. "I feel it," he said, "and it terrifies me." "Good. I'm terrified too." She moved closer. "So we'll be terrified together." When she kissed him, it tasted like coffee and salt air and the kind of courage that came from knowing something was impossible but choosing it anyway. Ryan's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and for that moment, the world reduced to just them. No wealth, no social barriers, no judgment. Just two people choosing each other despite every reason not to. They rode back slowly, neither wanting the morning to end. At Ryan's building, Celeste reluctantly returned the helmet, her hair wild, her makeup smudged, looking more alive than any photograph Ryan had seen of her in business magazines. "I should go," she said, not moving. "I have a dinner thing tonight, investors." "Okay, but I don't want to." "Then don't." Celeste smiled. "It's not that simple." "It could be." "Could it?" She searched his face. "Ryan, I want to see where this goes, but you need to know what you're signing up for. The media will be brutal. My board will question my judgment. Your life will become public property. I know. And you're willing to risk that for someone you barely know?" Ryan thought about Jennifer walking away, about years of being invisible, about a life lived safely but small. "I've played it safe before. It didn't make me happy. Maybe it's time to try something reckless." Pidal, before the Creator's Channel wishes, I'd like to take this moment to say, Merry Christmas to all of you who are following this story. May God protect you and keep you safe through the holidays and beyond. This is the Creator's wish for all of you, that you find love, hope, and connection in your own lives just as our characters are finding theirs. Celeste leaned up and kissed him again, softer this time. A promise rather than a question. "Then let's be reckless together. Coffee tomorrow? I work until 2. I'll meet you here at 2:30. She walked to her car, turned back once to wave, then drove away. Ryan stood in the parking lot long after she'd disappeared, trying to process how his life had transformed in less than a week, from humiliation to hope, from loneliness to possibility. His phone buzzed, a text from Celeste. "Thank you for today, for the ride, for the honesty, for being exactly who you are. See you tomorrow." Ryan replied, "Thank you for the risk. It's worth it." In her penthouse across the city, Celeste stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, seeing someone she barely recognized, someone happy, scared, alive. She'd built walls around herself after her father's death, convinced that vulnerability was weakness and connection was liability. Ryan had walked through those walls without even trying, simply by being genuine in a world of performance. The dinner party that night was excruciating. Investors in $1,000 suits discussing quarterly returns and expansion strategies, while Celeste's mind stayed fixed on blue motorcycles and a man who wrote poetry in secret and understood that success wasn't measured in bank accounts. Over the next weeks, they met whenever schedules allowed. Coffee before Ryan's shifts, late dinners after Celeste's meetings, long rides on weekends where the miles melted their differences. Ryan learned that Celeste was funny, genuinely kind, and carrying weight that would have crushed someone without her strength. Celeste learned that Ryan was brilliant in ways business school didn't measure, that his philosophy came from living rather than reading, and that his choice to work with his hands was wisdom rather than failure. They kept their relationship quiet, knowing the revelation would bring scrutiny neither was ready for. But secrets have a way of emerging, and 3 months after that first kiss on the cliff, a photographer caught them leaving Ryan's building together, her hand in his, their faces showing unmistakable intimacy. The tabloids erupted. Billionaire CEO dating hotel janitor. The articles ranged from curious to cruel, dissecting Ryan's background, speculating about his motives, questioning Celeste's judgment. The hotel's board demanded a meeting. Friends and family offered opinions nobody had requested. Through it all, they held steady. Celeste refused to apologize for her choice. Ryan refused to hide. They faced the storm together, learning that love wasn't just the easy moments of connection but the hard work of choosing each other when the world provided endless reasons not to. 6 months after that kiss blown across a marble lobby, Ryan opened his motorcycle restoration shop with Celeste as a silent partner, not because he needed her money but because she believed in his dream. The shop thrived, became a gathering place for enthusiasts who appreciated craftsmanship over commerce. A year later, Celeste returned to medical school part-time, finally pursuing the calling she'd abandoned. The board adapted. The company survived. Life, as it turned out, had room for both duty and desire when you were brave enough to reach for both. On their first anniversary, they rode the blue Harley back to that cliff overlook. Ryan had a ring in his pocket, simple silver with a small sapphire the color of the ocean. He was terrified and certain in equal measure, knowing that proposing meant permanently binding his life to hers, with all the complications that entailed. But as he watched Celeste stand at the railing, wind in her hair, happiness evident in every line of her body, Ryan realized that the question wasn't whether to risk everything for love. The question was whether anything else was actually worth protecting. Some risks are worth taking. Some impossible loves are the only ones that matter. And sometimes a blown kiss across a hotel lobby is the beginning of everything that makes life worth living. Did any of you have an important object that connected you to someone special? An heirloom, a gift, something that carried memories and meaning? Comment here and share your story. Sometimes the smallest things hold the greatest love.